Time for us to go into detailed analysis of our newspaper stories inside of Freshly Pressed 981. To do justice to these stories, we have Fulu Storms at Fulu
Good morning,
Storms.
good morning, good morning, Lagos.
Good morning to you. And Justin EJ at Justin EJ on Twitter.
Morning.
Good morning. And last but not the least, Cheta Wanze. Good morning, Cheta. Welcome. Pick any mic.
Marginalization.
Welcome, Cheta.
Good morning.
You can send us messages through Twitter. Use that hashtag freshlypress981. Twitter handle is at smooth981fm. WhatsApp number is 0809444091. And we're streaming live on YouTube.
That's right. All right, move straight to our first story for this morning. An update on the Process and Industrial Development Limited $9.6 billion fraud. And EFCC arraigned two British nationals. We have here that before the Justice Okonabang of the Federal High Court in Abuja, two British nationals named James Richard Nolan and Adam Quinn, who is at large, have been arraigned. Can you please take us through this story, Justin?
Okay, so this is a continuation of the P&ID saga. For those of us who've been following it, it's about the alleged fraudulent deal that the Nigerian government got into with this company called P&ID. It's originally, so here's the thing. We signed a gas supply and purchase agreement with this company. Under the terms of the deal, they were supposed to construct a gas plant, which is to convert wet gas to dry gas, which is what you would then use to fire power plants.
Yeah.
They were to build this plant somewhere in Nigeria, and Nigerian government was to supply the gas. Under a GSPA, ordinarily in the industry, it's usually done under a take or pay arrangement, i.e., I'm supplying you gas. So it usually leans in favor of the person supplying gas. That's one of the things I personally find curious about that arrangement, and I've had an issue with it from day one. If I'm supplying you gas, we sign an agreement. You're either, once I commit to supplying that gas, you're either going to take that gas or you're going to pay me, whether you're in readiness to accept the gas or not. But the way we did this deal leaves much to be desired, and is ballooned into today what is a $9.6 billion debt, right?
Yeah.
The government has reacted. A lot of things have been happening in this current story. So we have two British nationals, James Nolan and Adam Quinn, have been arraigned in court. One of them is in absentia, as said in the story. Okay, but another curiosity for me is they're very high-profile British nationals, and in fact, current British government officials who are involved in this thing. There's a lady called Priti Patel. Priti Patel is current Home Secretary. Priti Patel wrote several articles a couple of years ago in support of P&ID, hyped the story up, and the allegations are that she either was paid by the lobby company, even though the company that lobbies for P&ID had come out to say, no, we didn't pay her. But the fact is, she did lobby for the P&ID case extensively before the judgment was given against Nigeria.
She
I don't know.
actually had form. Remember, she was sacked by, I think it was Theresa May or David Cameron.
It was Cameron that sacked her.
For taking, for some kind of under the table waka with Israel. So she has form for under the table waka.
Exactly. She has that history. She was sacked, and then the current British administration reinstated her. So we have that shadow hanging over all of that. On this P&ID, it will be interesting to see where this story ultimately goes. I like the fact that the government is taking a hard stand. I'm behind them on this one.
All right, thank you very much. But that doesn't still address the fine they have to pay, or the award they've been the arbitral award. It doesn't take that.
We are a sovereign country, you know. It's all well and good that some court somewhere has given that judgment, and some hawks can start arguing that, oh, it's bad for international investment. But listen, this was a well-articulated scam. There were Nigerians involved, there were foreigners involved. I am with this government on this particular issue all the way.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Justin. Move on to our next story. I'll come to you for this. Bandits sack 2000 in Kaduna at Police Parade 81. Guardian newspaper reports that bandits have displaced 15 villages in the Gabi West Local Council of Kaduna State. This actually happened on Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m. However, news is just reaching many newspapers carried it from early this morning. Cheta, please can you take us through the story?
It's sad what has happened to the villagers, but it highlights again the absolute carnage that's happening in a lot of rural areas in what's in both the middle belt and in the northwest of our country. Now, Kaduna has been at the receiving end of a lot of this for quite a while now. We're talking of years, so talking of at least 3 years. The violence in the countryside, in the rural countryside in Kaduna, has been escalating. It's one of the things that we track in my organization, and with the exception of Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa, we because our method usually involves media monitoring, and then we send people in to speak with people, verify, and we except for Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa for obvious, what I like to think are obvious reasons. And but in Kaduna, in Zamfara, in Katsina, this second part, sending people to verify, has become a lot harder. Not because it's not because we don't want to, but because the number of incidents has gotten it's you are always chasing, you're always chasing, and we simply don't have the resources to cope. So since February, as an example, in Kaduna alone, we've tracked 83 incidents with up to 223 people killed in incidents that have to do with banditry, kidnap, large-scale assaults on villages. We don't we can't even begin to track accurately the number of people who have been displaced. This thing is a crisis. And the root cause of the whole thing is something that has now gone out of view of a lot of people. We as in you can't even intelligently say this is what started it. And this is the problem with crises that go on and on and on without a solution. It just as at some point it metastasizes and becomes something else. So a lot of there's the so for example in Zamfara, there's the part of the crisis there is people looking to secure land for artisanal mining. That spills into areas like Birnin Gwari in Kaduna. Now, there's also the farmer header, the pastoral thing. Then there's the religious angle. All of these different causative factors are linking into, and then there's the high unemployment that has led a lot of young people, young men especially, to take to kidnapping, and then the fact that we reward these kidnappers. So, as an example, the
When you
police
say reward,
pay ransom.
right?
Yeah. As an example, the policeman who was kidnapped on Sunday, released the next day. The death fund boss that was kidnapped a few months ago and then released after a hefty sum was paid. Essentially, the message sent to these guys is, "Oh, this is a good money making, yeah," and it gets worse.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Quite sad developments there. It's just broke. The news broke this morning, and we'll bring you updates as it progresses. But we have reports in that story as well as with regards to what has been done. Some criminals have been apprehended as well, so you might want to look at that for details.
All right.
We'll move on to the next story.
Let's move on very quickly to this next one from the Punch newspaper. I'll come to you, Folu, for your analysis on the recent court's judgment, the progress of this court proceedings regarding Shori, the convener of the Revolution Now protest. There was a plea that went to the judge to reduce the bail sum from 100 million to 50 million and down to possibly 20 million. Please take us through this story.
All right. So, in from the Punch newspaper, the Federal High Court has varied the conditions that were granted to the convener of the Revolution Now protest, Omoyele Sowore, and his co-defendant as well, because he's not the only person currently incarcerated, Bakari. Now, it was varied to the extent that Justice Ijoma Ojukwu reduced the amount attached to Bakari's bail from 50 million to 20 million, waived the earlier that one of Shore's surety should deposit 50 million naira as security. Now we know that Shore's lawyers, especially Falano, were very particular about certain conditions because they felt they were onerous initially. I think the order was that the sureties would have to deposit 100 million, which is problematic. And not just that, but they would also need to have properties, be resident in Abuja and have properties worth the same amount, which, as you can imagine, is a little bit difficult and to meet for some people, I guess. Some would argue not so much. But that has been varied, which is a good sign. But Falana is still arguing that at the end of the day, the order to release Shori initially had not been signed and hasn't been set aside till date. So this is a later, bail situation. I find that quite curious because it does feel as though the courts are in conflict with themselves, which is problematic. But the reality as well still remains that for a treasonable felony, the government, as I even say the court necessarily, will actually want to set an example, because at the end of the day, that you encourage people to go outside and use inciting language is problematic, and it's something that Shuri would have been aware of. But we'll see how this plays out. It is the court showing some sort of leniency, but still he would still be restricted to Abuja, and Olawale would be restricted to his base in Osogbo, except to come to Abuja for a trial.
Well, Falana was pushing to, trying to convince courts that it seems a bit unfair because Shori is not resident in Abuja, does not have a house in Abuja. So if he's granted bail and he's restricted to the Abuja area, do you think his push will be granted by the courts for him to be granted at least leave to go beyond Abuja?
I sincerely doubt it, and I sincerely doubt it because if the idea is that you are trying to restrain someone who has been able to gather protesters or gather people in large numbers, you're going to want to restrict the area to which and the extent to which that person can continue to do that, at least pending a full trial. And the idea again is being that you are sort of inciting people to revolt against an existing government, and that's a very serious issue. And I think that regardless of how as individuals we feel or how various individuals may feel, we must remember that this is a sovereign nation, and that any act that appears as a threat to the nation will be taken very, very seriously, and that's what we're seeing play out now.
Thank you.
I just have, just to be clear, there was no act. There was a statement. There was, if you like, a declaration.
That is an action.
Well, at the street level, because you did say someone who has been able to gather a crowd of protesters. There was no gathering. Okay. Just to be clear on that, so we don't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So Tiger Kent from Ikoyi says, "Good morning, guys. It's not only that we reward kidnappers. Some kidnapped victims, and in some cases, individuals linked to the victims are part of the kidnappers, including collusion from the security forces or colluding with the security forces. It is big business."
And it's important to stay clear that the use of reward by Cheta meant or was referring to ransom payments, just to be clear.
And then Chikagina said, "There's more to this Shore detention than we know. Nnamdi Kanu bail conditions is stiffer than that of Shore, yet people stood for him. Why then is it that Shore cannot get 2 shorties for his bail?" All right, let's move on.
So do we really? Is the obvious answer being that Nnamdi Kanu disappeared? I think that's
No.
I'm just going to point that out.
No, the points.
People actually
Nnamdi
stood shorty.
Kanu's bail conditions were stiffer, but people stood shorty for him.
I
His
understand.
disappearance after the fact is a totally different matter. Here, people are not coming out to stand shorty for sure.
No, what I'm saying is that after seeing that sort of behavior act itself out, I would be a lot more hesitant to put my neck on the chopping block for someone, is the point.
I disagree.
I'm just pointing out.
Which of you has
Thank you
50
very
million
much.
to go and deposit in Abuja? I don't know why people are arguing about it.
Justin.
Yes.
Let's go on to our next story. Alleged 12 billion naira fraud. Saraki forfeits 2 houses to federal government.
Okay.
So from this report in the New Telegraph, Justice Mohammed Liman of a federal high court in Lagos has ordered the temporary forfeiture of 2 properties located at the Ikoyi area of Lagos State belonging to the immediate and past Senate President Dr. Bukola Saraki to the federal government. Now, interesting in this story, as you'd see at the very end, is the response from Saraki's camp. Can you please take us through this story?
Conflict in the courts,
Yes.
like Fulu referenced in the last in the last story. So the Federal High Court in Lagos under Justice Liman just ordered temporary forfeiture of a property in Ikoyi belonging to Dr. Bukola Saraki, the former Senate President. And the Senate President, in his response, has issued a statement saying that, listen, you guys must be jokers. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. There was another court case brought by the ICPC against Saraki this same property was attached, which went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has declared that you couldn't prove that the proceeds with which or that the money with which that property was bought were proceeds were illicit, proceeds of some illicit activity or whatever. Therefore, why is this court doing this? He says, well, he's conjecturing that the court has been misled, and he's quite confident that it will be the judgment will be set aside. But somewhere in the middle of the story is what really tickled me. So the EFCC detailed its case and said that the money, they're alleging that the money he used to buy the property was money stolen from the Kwara State government when he was governor. And they went on to detail how the stealing was done. That 12 billion naira cash was taken from the Kwara State government and paid directly to his personal account, facilitated by his personal assistant, Abdul Adama, at different intervals. He names Abdul Adama, he names the controller of finance in Kwara State at the time, Isiaka Karim, who would fraudulently hand over the money to the respondent, most times to one Mr. Dauda Bayo Abdul Rahman, a staff of one of the bigger banks in the country, and who was then group head, Southwest Division, in charge of public sector accounts. That on collection of the money by Dauda, Abdul Rahman from Abdul Adama, the money will further be laundered by depositing it into the respondent's personal account number, and they named the account number. So it's quite detailed. Very detailed. And that leads me to look beyond, the two courts seem to be in conflict. Were these same facts presented to the earlier court, right, that ended up saying, no, property, you can't prove that? Yeah. Because I remember when that case was handled, I think the gentleman was still in power as deputy. He still wielded considerable influence. Yeah. Interesting. What I like is catch one today, catch one tomorrow. At the end of the day, we have one less, whatever you choose.
All right, so just a very quick one there. So when we have things like this, I don't know, we have an expertise, we have an order that it should be forfeited, then we have an existing Supreme Court or High Court ruling as well, saying that he didn't, saying that he was.
That one is a Supreme Court.
Supreme Court ruling. So which one stands? Because according to Saraki's camp, they're going to throw it out. So where do we have cases like this where there's a ruling on one hand and another?
Wait, I don't need to go for
a little understanding for Lulu, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think that court takes precedence.
Yes, the Supreme Court is Supreme Court. The ruling is final.
So it's going to be thrown out.
Meaning this declaration by the lower court is of non-effect.
It's null and void. All right, thank you.
The key thing here is what Justin has pointed out earlier. This level of detail was not available earlier, and what it brings for me is that rush
to go to the Supreme Court.
No, not even. No, it went through the system the last time. So it's the rush to go to court. It's something that I've complained about in this show before. Finish building your case. Yeah. I mean, this detail is new. It's fresh. So, but finish building your case before you rush to court. But the problem we always have with these people is this rush to do media trial.
Right.
Could that be because it's politicized to some extent?
It doesn't matter.
Let's take some comments.
So the real issue is not criminal justice.
We have a few comments here on WhatsApp. We're still on banditry. We have this one from, please put your name when you send in your comments so we can take them. But what's your take on the stamp duty charge and excess cash? Oh, that was from earlier on. What will happen to Nnamdi Kanu's shorties though? If nothing, then it shouldn't deter anybody from coming forward for sure.
Still in the National Assembly.
Colin says, hi Justin.
And what is nothing?
A quick question. Don't you think the rule of double jeopardy will apply for this or to this? Notwithstanding that relevant evidence was not presented in the first case.
Yeah, and that's it. That's what he has said. Double jeopardy.
You can't try me for the same thing twice.
Don't worry.
But don't underestimate the ingeniousness of our law enforcement. When they want to get you,
they'll get you. All right, let's move on to our next story. Now, the focus is on education. Punch newspaper has this one. State varsities face hard times as governors cut subventions. Jetta, this will go to you. Now, hit by shrinking allocations from the federation account, state governments are abandoning their responsibility of funding their universities. This is actually an investigation by Punch newspaper. Very worrying findings here. Can you please take us through the story? They've gone to a number of universities, south, east, north. Please take us through the story.
Well, they used 3 case studies: Akwa Ibom, Osun, and I don't know why you use the word worrying, because for me it's actually quite a nice dose of reality. Simple and short, money no day. should you be running university when money no dey? So they talked in Akwa Ibom State University, third fund hostels have been converted to offices. The university is sort of like renting out those spaces to people who are willing to pay because they define money. In Ondo State University, the subvention from the state was reduced from the paltry 60 million it was before to an even more paltry 42 million. Because and even that 60 million was not enough to pay salaries. Essentially, what they are saying is that the Ondo State University of Science and Technology is owing. In Uni Oshun, it said that in the 8 years of Arigbe Shola's governorship, not a single project was executed. See, all of this just points to a to the one reality that Nigerians have refused to accept, and the impression of the then governor, that's Arigbe Shola, was that the university was coping, but the poor students were the ones being made to pay exorbitant fees. That was the last the ASU chairman or Femi Abanikada. See, university education anywhere on planet Earth is not cheap. We have been running an unsustainable model where people will come and what I pay for my children's school fees now per term is more than what I paid for my entire Uniben. We need to be realistic. It is not sustainable. A, university education is not for everybody. B, it's not cheap. So we need to reset that mindset where everybody is expected to have a bachelor's, because it makes you start asking, what is the worth of that bachelor's? If our universities have essentially turned to Gary schools, where people just come, hardly any research is going on, how can you go through the four walls of a university and you haven't seen a Bunsen burner? What kind of nonsense is that?
Thank you very much. As
Well, you have seen a tire burning.
A glorified secondary school, and like you pointed out, that in many places, many developed parts of the world, university education you can have that was the idea for basic education,
There's
whereby at
absolutely
the end
no
of
crime, Ayo. If Nigeria, as big as we like to think we are, we're not that big to be honest, but that's another discussion entirely. If Nigeria is big as we like to think we are, if we have just two that are properly funded to global standards, and then the best of our best from secondary school go there and come out and are competitive anywhere on the planet, they can lead this country to prosperity.
Yeah, so they should shut down the universities and promote vocational training.
Which is similar to what Obi from Alaba International is proposing. It says our universities should be, should be focused on research. You're seeking funding for research. That's what's lacking, is what he thinks. Dadisha Boy says, Sure, Mr. Revolution, a man who claims 85% of Nigerians are behind him and is called for revolution. I wonder, Shore had disappointed the youth, is what Dadisha Boy thinks. He says ideologies retrogressive. At least if all the 85% of social media whalers contributed 1,000 naira, he would have had enough even to go to holidays in Dubai. For Saraki's case, I believe it's a lesson to him and his camps for betraying the powers that be. Good morning. Interesting. Thank you very much for that. That is Shaboy. We'll move on to you, Fulu, for your analysis on this next story. New Telegraph reports how, according to this statement from the presidency, how we are using Abacha's $322.5 million loot. They said it's largely been pushed into national social investment programs, according to this report from the special advisor, quoting the special advisor to the president on social investments. Your thoughts on this, please?
Okay, so according to the story, we'll cast our minds back. 2014 was a Swiss judge that gave a forfeiture order to the effect that 322.5 million US dollars recovered from the Abacha family would be returned to Nigeria. Now, there have been a lot of questions. I think the average Nigerian asks at least maybe once every 2 weeks, what's happening to the recovered loot? They say the recovered loot, where is it going? But what the article is basically trying to tell us is that about 76.5 million US dollars so far from the Abacha loot has been put towards the National Cash Transfer Program, NSIP, which a component of the National Social Investment Program, which is NSIP, and that in itself has, in some quarters, raised eyebrows. I know that there are people who feel, well, what's the purpose or what's the point of handing out 5,000 naira or 10,000 naira to people? How's that going to alleviate the real issues? But I find it quite interesting that I think it's Uwais that talks about it in the article, says, yes, there's some people that may say that, but by all means, and say that, infrastructure is really what, people need. And I quote her where she says, by all means, provide the tangible structures, but having schools in their communities will make no sense to the family whose priority is to find something to eat even once a day. We do know that it is a struggle for a lot of people in Nigeria. We do know that is quite tough. So the idea is that handing out this cash and the cash transfer scheme will somehow make their lives better. I'm probably in the portion of the country that she says, would say things like, well, 5,000 naira here, 10,000 naira there. But in our day-to-day lives, we do see the kind of impact that cash has on people's lives. This is unfortunately what is also used to persuade a lot of people in tougher economic situations to sell votes, to do the quote-unquote unthinkable. It's easy to stand on principles when your stomach is full, but the reality is that people do need this money. So if that's how it can be accounted for, especially when the contrary argument is, if we put it towards other things, it's a lot easier for it to be stolen than if we hand it out to people directly in cash. I don't know how true that is. I'd like to know why the administrative process favors one over the other. But there you go. That's the rationale.
When we get to
It's $300 million, right?
Yes, in
Yes,
total. So far,
three.
76.
How many
has been
Nigerians are
dispersed.
we again?
there's a World Bank study.
Well,
According to
There's
the
a World
report,
Bank study
200
on the
million.
If you give
effectiveness
everybody
of,
$1 million,
There's a World Bank study on the effectiveness of these cash transfers. Things I would hand out, give it to you so that we can talk about it later. I'm completely cynical.
I know
about
that you
it
are.
because
You've
of-
expressed it severely and very clearly.
Yeah.
I do know that.
And it kind of left a bad feeling in my stomach because first we ask questions about transparency, accountability, how this monies are disbursed, and then
Well, there are people who are registered to the scheme,
yeah,
and it's those who are registered to the scheme that get.
but the money still goes
funds.
back into the system.
I may go.
There's
That
no
does
need for me
not-
to share the
but
World
hardly
Bank study.
exists. But anyway.
because their data is not their data is rubbish. I forgot.
So here's a reiteration of what we already know, but the implementation it's in question. From the Guardian newspaper, there's a report with a headline: "It is criminal to collect money for bail. The AIG warns policemen," and this is in a training program. Justin, take us through the story, please.
maybe I should just laugh. We all laugh.
No.
It's so sad. Oh wow.
I mean,
Wow.
We should all just laugh.
what
at
new
this.
developments do you expect from this move or from this statement?
No.
See, okay,
Let's just laugh.
Let me just. this
Bail
is-
is free. Jetta,
These
please help me.
statements, it's not just there's the larger implication of these statements
Mm.
because we all know that the policemen will ignore him. The larger implication of these statements is for years now, new police inspector generals or AIGs or they come and make these statements,
No roadblocks.
and then their people completely ignore them. It tells you essentially that our police force has gone rogue.
It's the official
That's it.
welcome speech. That's what
Exactly.
we know to expect it now, and that's what happens. I
But
just
the effects, the long-term effect is that our police force has gone rogue. They do what they like. End of story.
I think the extreme saying they've gone rogue is extreme. I do think that there is a complete lack of will from the top down to punish
Nobody saying Papa
anyone
born two
that's
of them.
excuse me, please let's speak clearly. I don't like this, you're extremists one end the other. The reality is if there are punitive actions for people who are going ahead and enforcing this collecting bill, then we know what will happen.
Yeah.
But the reality is there isn't.
There are no
And so coming
consequences.
out to make a statement is neither here nor there. Thank you very much, sir. But
It's very hypocritical because the police formations are not even funded to run basic administrative services. There's no part the or the person behind bars has to bring money to buy petrol to run the gen.
Yes.
You come to file a complaint, you have to buy petrol for them to put in the vehicle, and you can see that it's not the policemen extorting. They need that
They need
money.
it.
I'm not excusing extortion, but I'm saying,
But it's the
listen,
reality.
this is the reality. So don't be coming and giving us sound bites about bail is free. Blah, blah, blah. You people should fund the police formations properly if we really want to have a police force, not a ragtag team
So
of people
essentially-
who are armed.
They have to depend on the money they collect on the streets to fund.
Exactly.
Sadly.
That's
Right.
anyway.
Modukwe Sander on YouTube says it's easy to stand on principles when your stomach is full for loose storms.
2019.
What we have in Nigeria
Well
is
done, Mabo.
weaponized poverty.
Yes, more
And-
poverty.
Weaponized poverty.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And then we have here Lekki 247 blog says Rore actually doesn't have the support of the masses and the elites. Government people don't like him. Nandi Kanu, on the other hand, is more loved. I'm sure he'll have get 1 million votes if he runs for president in the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Right.
That's on Twitter.
Yes.
Unfortunately, this is what we draw the curtains on the show. Well,
Congratulations, Nigerians, for the Canada victory.
what was that?
Yes, from Justin to all of you, my dear colleague and
Special
namesake
thanks
Justin.
to
Yes, sends out his thanks to Nigerians for voting him in.
Okay, that's
in the
an
Canadian
aside.
elections.
Not the opinions of Smooth Offenses. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Cheta. Please catch Folu Storms on Twitter and also on the Grapevine next at Folu Storms here on Smooth 98.1. Good morning.
You didn't hear that election was more important to Nigerians than Canadians.